Hi everyone, and welcome to the Wargame Parrot. I'm David. I am joined by Sophie and again Dr Jason Crean, and we're going to be discussing anthropomorphism. It's an incredibly important topic. I did an intro video on it, which I will leave a copy for now, so you can just get an introduction if you want to just have a really brief introduction to it. And just to briefly define the term, it is just applying human emotions and values onto something else, in this case, parrots. And we're going to be discussing it in detail, breaking it down to subsections and just going through everything, and maybe even talking about how it can be applied in a positive way. So before we do begin, I know you guys should know we've had interviews before with Dr. Jason Crean, and I'll leave links for them in the description. But could you introduce yourself again, Jason?
Sure. My name is Jason Crean. I am a biologist and science communicator, and I have been involved in birds since I was 12 years old, and which is, I'm not going to say how many years, but that was it's a very long time. And I'm currently living in Orlando, Florida, where I keep aviaries of and breed different birds like Sierra parakeets and some of the softbills.
Cool, very cute. Sophie, just people on my channel should know who you are, but we do get some crossover, so do introduce yourself as well.
Yeah. Hi guys, I'm Sophie, also known as BirdNerdSophie. I've been working with animals, specifically birds, for about 12-13 years now. I have an honours degree in animal behaviour and welfare, specialising in birds, and I've studied modules like animal cognition and sentience and all kinds of things like that, and animal and human relationships, which is really interesting and hopefully ties into this video a lot. And I've worked with loads of different species of birds, so I'm really excited to talk about this kind of topic. So
awesome.
It's really important.
Yes, thank you both for joining us. Hopefully you guys will get a lot of benefit from this. I'm quite sure I will, as usual too. Just before we begin, I wanted to mention something very important. Because of my last video and some comments I got, I want to say that in this video, we're not saying that parrots do not have emotions. I think all of us believe to some degree that parrots do have emotions. It is the problem when we apply our emotions onto those parrots that we're discussing here. So just before we begin, that's what we're discussing, applying our emotions to parrots, not denying in any way that parrots have their emotions or own sets of values. They have their own set of values and emotional reactions based on their evolutionary development, and that's not for discussion, it's just the human side of it. Right, guys, thank you very much for joining me. We've got several things we're going to talk about, and we're going to sort of go round robin and interject and maybe give our opinions. And we're going to start with anthropomorphism in diet. And I think the perfect person to start with this would be Jason to discuss this topic, because I think you've got some strong feelings on it.
So this is this brings out the ire in people, especially on social media, because we tend to want to make each other happy with food, and that's bad. Though that was how I was raised. Especially with the Italian side of my family. But when it comes to human foods, what I see most is the misinterpretation of veterinarians telling their clients, like, human foods are good for your birds. That means healthy human foods. But then on top of that, and I know it's true in the States, like when we're in school, we don't get a lot of education around nutrition. And so there is huge misconceptions about what foods are actually healthy and what's not. And so that spills over into the keeping of our animals. I see it with parrots every day. I see it with dogs and cats, more so dogs, because dogs will eat anything that you put in front of them all of the time. But I see this a lot because people are not clear on what's actually healthy by and large. And so I often say, like with parrots, don't cook anything. And definitely don't offer anything warm. That can cause all kinds of issues. And, you know, birds don't eat anything heated in the wild. That's obvious. Humans are kind of the exception because we have to cook certain things so that we don't become, you know, sick from certain things. But we're not offering those things to our parrots. So knowing what's healthy, like pizza and pasta, is not healthy for us. Not healthy for us. And I know there's people who are yelling at me right now through the screen. I'm sorry. That's just the truth. It's not healthy for us. And then offering those foods to your bird because you think you're helping them or because they quote unquote like it is not a reason. And some people will give the excuse of, oh, but it's in moderation. There is no moderation when it comes to unhealthy foods. A little bit goes a long way in a tiny bird's body. And I'm talking macaws too. Macaws have a tiny body, relatively speaking. So, you know, we tend to want to get our pets to like us more. They will love you no matter what. And yes, I just anthropomorphized, but they will love you no matter what if you're feeding them healthy foods that they will become accustomed to eating if they're not already eating. So knowing what's healthy is really important. Limiting portion sizes so that your birds don't have mounds and mounds and mounds of food all the time is very important. You know, and I see it with human children too. Like, people are overfeeding their kids. They're giving them lots of processed unhealthy foods, thinking that some of them are healthy. And, you know, we can't give in. So just you know, we need to educate ourselves on what's healthy for us. And then of those foods, what we could share with our birds, like animal meats, not appropriate for parrots. No one can change my mind on that. We've seen too much already. And, you know, just knowing what's healthy and how much is appropriate, and not basing it on what humans eat and how much humans eat. That's a big mistake that people make with their pets.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Another thing as well that I've seen is some of these kind of parrot food marketers are very good at targeting foods at humans rather than whether they're species appropriate for birds. For example, I've seen like yogurt coated peanuts and colourful like pretzel corn snacks, and you know, the treat sticks you see all the time bound with like molasses and honey. They're not good for your birds. I mean, you think you're giving them a treat, but a treat like a reinforcer for training and things like that and foraging can be just the kind of healthy foods we want to be giving our birds, like tree nuts and seeds and foraging flowers and things like that. And they don't need these bound together pretty looking things, and it comes into, you know, the pellets that we see coated in these harmful dyes because they look really fun to us, and it's like cereals, so our birds are going to love them. And it's like, well, they'll probably eat them, but it's not going to be doing their insides any good. So I think we need to be mindful about what sort of things are being marketed towards us rather than whether they are going to be providing health benefits. And I've seen some kind of similar things as well, where there's a lot of kind of parrot kind of cookies or like parrot biscuits on the market, and they look natural, but at the end of the day they're still ultra processed, so they're going to be, as Jason says a lot, you know, heated to the point of dryness so they can sit on the shelf, and that's not going to be good for your bird either. You know, when you've got a selection of amazing healthy whole foods that are much easier to kind of access and put together, you don't need to be buying these kind of pre-packaged human focused kind of treats and snacks for your bird.
I mean, it's very true. I mean, they have a great tactic of appealing to us. I mean, some of these pellets look like Lucky Charms, and I used to like a cereal. It wasn't good for us. It's not good for anyone, but this is what they look like. And I think you touched on something very important there, species appropriateness. And Jason sort of mentioned it a bit as well. So for me, an unhealthy treat is a pizza. And maybe due to my size, I can handle a bit of pizza once in a while.
We convince ourselves
we can handle a pizza once in a while. But for example, you don't have to give the human food to your parrot. For example, a treat for our conures would be a bit of fruit. And in moderation, that's fine for them. That's good for them. Or for our cockatiels, a bit of millet for training and stuff. Those are treats for them. And they have their own appropriate treats. They don't need our food as treats. We don't need to give them a bit of baguette. Like the macaw example, I saw a video of a macaw eating a croissant. Like, not, I'm talking about a tiny bit, a big croissant, and that is, look, proportion of that, it's almost as big as his body, just as you mentioned, and it's just crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So look at the treat, look at the foods, and look at what they should be eating, and then pick up the treat from what they should be eating, not from what we think they should be eating, and from the wide variety of rubbish that we eat as humans, and that we should know better. Because it's the same in the UK. I don't know if it's changed much, but when I was in school, there wasn't much nutrition education. It was just like, learn how to cook a pasta bake, learn how to make a sandwich. It's not very helpful, you know. Actual nutrition education would have been miles more helpful. So you have to teach yourself and try and filter through all of the stuff that's out there and just get down to the science of it and what's good and what's not, basically.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of it as well, which we've said in previous videos, is it comes down to human behavior. And you know, oh, you know, little Cookie really wants to have some of my cup of milky tea, so I'm just going to let him have a little sip because he really wants it. It's like, you know, I really want lots of things in life. It doesn't mean I can have them or I should have them. I'd have pizza every day if I could. Should I? Definitely not. So it's, yeah, as we say a lot, it's about training ourselves rather than, you know, training birds. And it's really hard because some of us don't have a strong will.
Well, and it's also shocking to me that what we're talking about is seen as controversial. Offering whole, healthy foods to parrots or whatever animal you're feeding, including us, is now seen as controversial. You know, I'm a proponent of people eating meat. I think that we should be rotating our meats, and I mean, they're incredibly nutritious, and but it's been largely demonized in the media, and people think that bread is healthy or pasta's healthy. You know, like, you really need to step back and let go of some of those stereotypes that we have been taught over the years, not based on science, definitely not based on science, but those things will spill over, you know, into what we offer our birds. And that's why I'm so against any kind of bird bread, or bird muffins, or, you know, anything that you have to cook or bake for your birds should be eliminated. Only offer foods that can be offered in their raw whole state. And there are literally hundreds of things that you can offer that you can pick up at a grocery store or get online anywhere.
Mm-hmm. With the meat side of things, I know there's going to be people in the comments talking about the, you know, the ethics, welfare, and I agree that whoever is going to be eating any kind of meat or animal products should be sourcing them from places that uphold high standards of animal welfare. But
Absolutely.
one of the things I found interesting from one of our previous talks is the amount of controversy that feeding live mealworms came from with birds. And it's, you know, it's so commonplace in the reptile community of feeding live insects, but the idea of feeding it to a bird was, you know, unheard of. And I had a lot of people who had very strong opinions. So for anyone who's not familiar, Jason, do you want to talk about mealworms and why that's a good thing and why we shouldn't be scared of the creepy crawlies?
Well, and if you want to talk anthropomorphism, I mean, there is a movement to start producing at an agricultural level to produce edible insects for people because of the lesser carbon footprint that they produce. I'm not for or against that, just I'm saying that right now. But mealworms are very nutritious. They better mimic what a parrot would eat in the wild. And like I think I've said on previous podcasts with you, one or both of you, you know, I talk to conservationists who are out in the wild, and they've described cockatoos extracting larvae from tree bark. Like, they've literally watched them do it. And so, you know, offering those is definitely an added piece of enrichment, a great healthy source. It's not animal meat. Big difference. And you're going to be getting them definitely healthier package of nutrients. And on top of that, if you leave mealworms in the sun for 15 to 20 minutes, they'll start producing their own vitamin D3. And that travels up the food chain. So if you are in a place where, you know, your bird can't be outside for 15 to 20 minutes a couple times a week to manufacture its own D3, which is not a lot of time. It doesn't need that much, you know, a ton of time to do that. You can offer something like mealworms that can do the job for you.
I mean, yeah, there's a lot of preconceptions when it comes to diet and the way we do things. Like the mealworm is a perfect example. You know, it's not something traditionally fed to parrots. It's normally, well, it's become the new standard for pellets right now. And to challenge that, it's difficult because of the way we behave. So it's quite an interesting topic to cover as well. Right, what we'll do now is we'll move on to anthropomorphism in the cage, because I know we could talk about diet in extensive detail. If you do want to see more on diet and the benefits of it, talk about pellets, diet, both me and Sophie have interviews with Dr Jason Crean, and we also, Jason has like loads of material itself that you can refer to. He has a podcast, a Facebook group. There's lots you can learn. So I'll let you guys do that on your own time. So, anthropomorphism in the cage. Now, I think we all have some very strong opinions in this. I see a positive way you can anthropomorphize the cage, which I'll talk about after everyone else has talked a little bit. But there's an awful lot of negatives in relation to this, and a lot of things that cause trouble in the cage for both us and our parrots. And it can lead to a lot of undesirable behavior. And people just don't realize because we're trying to see it from our perspective. So, Jason, what do you think about this?
Oh boy. So I always start at the same place. Your birds, the healthiest way for your bird to sleep is not the way a human being sleeps. The healthiest way for your bird to sleep is with its feet and legs locked in place on a perch, because that is how they spend almost their entire lives. That's what they've been evolved to do. They will only go into a nest in order to raise chicks, and even then, they don't spend all of their time in there. And so we have this misconception that offering our birds a fleece-lined tent or hut of some kind is going to be beneficial for them, and it's not. Almost every time I talk to someone with specific type of birds who are experiencing, let's just say they're referring to hormone surges, the first question I ask is, how do they sleep? And I'm 9 times out of 10, they have something in the cage the bird is sleeping in. I even talked to someone that said, well, I hang my sweatshirt in there and they crawl into it and sleep because I think they like the smell. Okay, this is just bad news. This is just bad news. Birds become hormonal when they're nesty, when they're broody. And so we want to avoid that. So there's no reason for that to give them a nest for comfort. We also see them ingesting this. And I know there's people out there that have said, oh, my bird's had one for years and it's fine. When the environment is right, their hormones will change. And that tent is going to help trigger that. It's a combination of environmental factors. Please be proactive, get rid of it. The bird doesn't need it. And that's really the biggest problem I see when it comes to anthropomorphizing, in their cages.
Sure. This also goes for anyone who's got like a seagrass one. I see that a lot of people say, well, it's okay because it's made out of seagrass. It's the same thing. It's still giving them like a nest hole. Now, I think there's very, very few species of parrot that would actively seek out, a tree cavity because there's just not enough of them in the wild. But I think golden conures do, but still it's about how we can coexist in the same living environment, whether that is actually going to trigger hormones. So I know that there's going to be people saying that in the comments. I thought I'd just throw that out there. For me, I'm going to be controversial again. The thing that I wanted to talk about, because no one seems to be talking about it, are heated perches and heat panels in cages. Everyone, again, it's this idea that birds need to be cozy and warm when they're sleeping, just like we do, wrapped up in a little blanket. But again, they don't need them. If you're, keeping your home at about 18 degrees C, which, if I've written it down, is roughly about 64.5 Fahrenheit, then, your bird's going to be fine. But they have this amazing adaptation to fluff up their feathers to trap in the air to keep themselves warm, or flatten down to keep themselves cool. So they don't need these heated panels. But saying that, for some birds who maybe have arthritis in their feet, that warmth could actually be a good thing. But generally speaking, for a healthy bird, there's no need to be giving them these kind of extra warmth or anything like that if you're keeping your home at a decent temperature that's going to keep everyone healthy. So that's something I've seen a lot, and I'm curious to see what people say in the comments, but that's my personal opinion of something that doesn't seem to be spoken about, that feels quite anthropomorphic.
Oh, definitely. It's very much how we like to feel what we want, and you apply that to your bird and then it can cause trouble. I mean, there is an example where it could be beneficial. I want to talk a little about toys. You've got a lot of toys that are designed for human appeal. And we're talking about plastic toys with dummies on them, just toys that look like they're for us and they're marketed for us, and they don't really necessarily serve the best purpose for our birds. So plastic ones tend to be the biggest culprits for this, and I have a little bit of leeway for some plastic toys, especially with smaller birds. You can't actually shred them or damage them in any way to cause them harm, but I do believe they're actually potentially harmful for bigger parrots, because I've seen some case studies where a macaw's got its beak onto one of these dummies, a sliver's come out, it's gone down, and that's caused a lot of trouble. So it's something to be very cautious with these toys. Look at them for natural materials if you possibly can. Look for wood, look for ones that have positive reviews, and look for safe materials, because there are lots of things that can go wrong with poorly designed bells which are dyed, or those coloured bells that we've seen that cause a lot of toxicity trouble. Just be very careful. The one thing I wanted to mention as well is whether we're looking at cages, there is a place for anthropomorphism. I like to see our birds' cages as bedrooms, and I think that's a positive application for seeing it from our perspective. If we see their cage as a bedroom, we start to see it in a different way rather than just a cage, and we start to outfit it in a different way. I think I've used this analogy in various videos where in our room we have, you can't see it all because of what it's elsewhere, but we have our television, we have our PlayStation, we have our luxury bits and pieces. The equivalent for a parrot's cage for that would be treadable toys, having those lovely perches they can hop around on, having a substrate base, things that can engage them in natural behaviors they enjoy. Just like, well, I'm not sure if playing a PlayStation is potentially a natural behavior for me, but I enjoy it. They can have a positive environment. So looking at it from that perspective, I feel is beneficial. I see everyone agrees with me there. So does anyone else have
I just
anything?
wanted to say there's sometimes a group of people on social media who like cages are prisons, a bird should never be in the cage.
Yes.
But we need to see it as not only a bedroom, but also like an element of safety as well. You know, if we want to have the windows open, we don't have the luxury of air conditioning in the UK. Our birds have to be in their, you know, cages, they're prisons, as people say. But if the space is engaging, what we like to say to our clients when we're doing consultations is the space in the cage should be just as enriching as the time out of the cage. And if you haven't got that balance right, it's worth taking a step back and thinking, how can I use this space better? What kinds of things can I get my bird engaged in that cage? Because as David said, if it's plastic toys, what are they supposed to do with them? You know, just they give them a little jingle and then they've got, you know, another 12 hours of the day to entertain themselves. So it's getting that balance really.
Yeah, and I think I like the bedroom analogy. I think that's, you know, a cage is their safe space. And I've heard the same thing. Like, you know, my black palm cockatoo Sirius, he has a cage outside on the patio here. I'm in Florida. I have the luxury of putting him out there almost every single day. And he gets on his swing and he goes back and forth out there and he gets to see all the other birds in the aviary on the other side of the pool area. But he's safe in that cage. When I'm outside with him, I can put him on a chair with me and, you know, hang out. But it's not cruel. That's his safe space. He likes it. He likes it in there. He's not fighting to get out. And I want to make that as engaging as possible. So he's got, you know, wood appropriate toys and things like that in there at all times, as well as a lot of dietary enrichment where I hang greens and things like that. But, you know, as a zoo consultant, regarding, you know, its prison, and, you know, scientifically, there's a very old theory called the Umwelt theory, where, you know, these animals don't know what's beyond the walls of the zoo. And when we look at hormones, stress hormones, almost all zoo animals are not stressed. They are very comfortable. They're not dealing with predators and parasites and all this other stuff. And it's that whole misconception that the wild is this paradise. It's not. It's a really, really rough place. And so, you know, when we're looking at like zoo exhibits, which is the same as our cages, you know, we need to kind of step out of the human view and think about the species, because if you don't, you're doing them a disservice. What does this species need? What do they prefer to do when they're behaving, right? And that's critically important. But and I hear anthropomorphism every time I walk through a zoo, because there'll be, you know, someone will see like, you know, that the poor bear is sleeping on the ground. Well, that's where they sleep. You know, that's like they like to sleep there. That's what they do. They don't need a bed. It's not Goldilocks and the Three Bears, you know. So there's just a lot of this anthropomorphism when it comes to how we view animals living in their little habitats, and that's the same for cages.
That's very true. I mean, with the cage thing, there's something we're going to cover later, which is cage time out in day-to-day life. But just to cover it quickly now, like making that cage enriching environment is very important. But sometimes people believe that they should be out all the time of the cage. And as you said, that cage is a safe space. And if you provide that safe space and they don't know to enjoy themselves and go in there, you could lead yourself into trouble as a parrot owner when you need to go out or there's something else going on. So I'll touch on that. We'll talk about that later, because the next one's another very important one, and that's anthropomorphism in behaviour. We're talking about our behaviour towards parrots and misinterpreting our parrots' behaviours, because this happens an awful lot. I know I was guilty of this when I was starting to get into parrots a long, long time ago, and sometimes occasionally now, you know, when you get emotional, you can misinterpret what your parrots' behaviours mean, take them from our framework and not really understand what they're trying to convey. What are your thoughts on that, Jason?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think I see a lot of people who have their feelings hurt because of how their birds are behaving around them. And you need to give that up. You need to move on from that. That is not at all. If the bird is sending you a message, it has something to do with how they're perceiving their surroundings, and you don't want to fix the bird. The bird is behaving because it's behaving the way it needs to. You need to fix the environment in which that bird lives, and that includes our behavior around those birds. And knowing what reinforces your bird's behavior, such as if the bird is screaming and you look in its direction, you just reinforced it. That's really hard to break. We all do it. We're all guilty of it. But that's a really hard habit to break. Turning your attention away is a totally different story. And it's not intuitive, but it definitely helps curb those types of behaviors. Same thing with biting. If they bite and you pull away and you scream, you just reinforced it. You just gave them a reaction that they were looking for. And so, if I have a bird that's lunging at me, I stand as completely still as possible, maintaining my posture and everything, with my hand out in front of me, and I'll just pause, but I'm not going away. I'm not backing up, and you'll see their whole demeanor calm down, especially when it comes to birds. But yeah, the whole understanding the bird's motivation, and that the bird's motivation is not human motivation. We just do our birds a disservice when we're assuming that our birds are mad at us or hate us or whatever because we didn't give them what they wanted. And I can't stand when I hear someone say, oh, parrots are like a 2-year-old forever. Don't equate them to human beings at any stage. They are wired differently. They have evolved differently. We need to respect that and treat them like birds, which does not mean we're treating them as lesser beings. We're just treating them appropriately.
Yeah, for sure. Leading off from that as well, the amount of people that say, oh, my bird's mean, my bird's got an attitude problem, my bird's sassy. More often than not, the kinds of aggression that we see are usually down to 2 reasons. The first being hormones, because they're frustrated and they don't know how to exhibit it, or a fear response, either from past or present trauma. So we need to work out why they're experiencing this kind of set of behaviors, which they are then, showing us, and what we can do to alleviate that. Because, birds aren't mean. Birds aren't, they're not out to get you. They're not trying to dominate you, because we see this a lot with the height dominance. Your bird's going on the head because it's going to dominate you, be leader of the pack. It's nonsense. I don't want to hear about it. It's just rubbish. That's not their behavior. Birds live in a flock. It's cohesive. It's a cooperative relationship. It's not about they're trying to get one up on you. That's, again, putting all these human emotions onto birds. And the idea of jealousy, my bird's being jealous of this situation, it's you may feel that because you're putting your human emotions on, but how are you measuring this jealousy? How would you know how to equate jealousy? Because I think people who haven't kind of researched into the idea of emotions in animals, like, how do you measure that scientifically? Yes, for stress, we can measure, cortisol levels and things like that, or oxytocin in the brain for happiness, all these kind of things. But very specific human emotions like frustration, how would you scientifically measure that to prove that that's how an animal is, experiencing things? I think we need to be quite careful about what we say is true and what we are just, putting our own personal experiences and feelings onto.
That's very true. I mean, the best way to, I guess, try and measure your parrot's emotions is observing them and getting to know them, really, rather than just trying to apply your own immediately onto them. It's very easy to expect quick results from our parrots. And, for example, I wanted to mention the whole analogy with the children, a toddler analogy. That's normally used as a way of trying to quickly refer to how intelligent they are. It's nothing to do with their emotional maturity. It's nothing to do with their emotions. It's literally just to try and say they're very smart. They're very smart for animals. And then when you apply the whole toddler thing, it can become goes too far, really, because then people start to think that a toddler's in every way. And as Jason said, you start to almost mother them and baby them. And while they do have tantrums, as by occasional screaming, it's not the same. It's their way of behaving, not our way of interpreting it. and you have to be really careful. You can't put your own values and emotions onto your parrot. You can observe them and you can start to work out what theirs are potentially, but putting your own is not very good. And another thing with regards to this is not respecting their boundaries, and inappropriate petting is probably one of the biggest problems when it comes to behavior and misinterpreting it. For example, you should only really pet your parrot around the head, just like I'm doing there for mine. Very nice. You shouldn't be petting them elsewhere on the body, because if you pet them elsewhere in the body, it's almost like a simulation of mating, and you touch them inappropriately. Like, my parrot really loves being stroked on the back. It's like you're petting a dog or a cat. It's not the same. A cat loves that, and even, well, some cats love it a bit too much. You go near the tail, but you know, you shouldn't be petting your parrot like that, because you're giving it the wrong messages, and you're putting your own sort of like interpretation of their reactions onto it. It's hormonal almost all the time, or sometimes irritation. It's not enjoyment.
Yeah, and I actually made a graphic on Instagram recently about where you should and shouldn't pet your bird, which got a lot of controversy. Again, I'm being a real controversial person at the moment, which is not like me. But people did not like the fact that I said that you shouldn't sit and stroke your bird's feet. Now, if people read the text in my post, I did say you can touch your bird's feet for the purpose of training, for manipulation, for nail trimming. If you take your bird outside and you feel like you have trained them to, you know, hold the foot, as it were, if your bird's big enough for that, that's great. But I had some very angry people telling me how wrong I was and how I've never worked with birds because they've caressed their birds' feet and their birds love it. And it's not a zone that's typically found in mating, but ultimately in the wild, birds would not just let a random, you know, member of the flock touch their feet. It's going to be a bird that they're closely bonded to. So I didn't mean to ruffle feathers, as it were, but you know, people, I'm not like out there trying to, you know, stop your relationship with your bird, but it's about, you know, understanding where you shouldn't do it. So
I mean, it's part of the training with our parrots.
Yeah.
I touched our parrots' feet, and I would like touch them lightly to try and get them used to it. But on that point, you know, we talk about feet and them being a bit intimate for parrots. You see, our two conures, Pickles and Scampy, are very closely bonded. They're basically a bonded pair, and when they get sort of playful, they will interact with feet. It's not something they do normally. It's not something they do as part of it, but if they start getting a bit hormonal maybe, or they start getting very playful, they will interact with feet. So you can almost apply it to yourself. You start interacting with feet that way, your parrots will be thinking, well, are they trying to play with me, or are they trying to get a bit more than friends? You know, it can happen with feet. It can happen there.
Yeah, and when it comes to how you convey these things on social media, especially, your bird being sassy or stubborn and things like that, that's not cute. That's not cute. That is not behavior that we want to reward or let other people know that should be the norm. It's really important that we recognize that we can engage in positive reinforcement training and targeting and things like that, you know, especially when it comes to feet. Getting your birds to touch a target with their feet is one way that, you know, they can become accustomed to offering those body parts to you if they need to be inspected or whatnot. In the zoo world, target training is done with all the animals in some fashion so that they can be inspected by a veterinarian from behind a barrier for dangerous animals, you know, and things like that. But you know, these behaviors aren't cute. I see it all the time as stubbornness when it comes to birds, like not wanting to eat their vegetables. And that's not cute. Like we need to move them past that, and the bird's not going to hate you. The bird is going to appreciate you. I mean, just like human parents right now seem to be really worried that their kids are going to hate them because they say no. Look where it's gotten us. You know, so we definitely need to you know, to be making those better decisions for them as birds and not as little feathered people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I call my birds my babies because that's, you know, it's a nickname. It's because I care about them so much, but I'm not sitting there babying them. There's a real divide. You know, you can say, you know, they're your family, they're your babies. That's great, that's awesome. But when you start treating them like human children, that's when you're going to come into these problems. You're going to end up triggering these hormone responses and undesirable behavior, and then you'll sit and wonder, well, you know, why is my bird behaving like this? And it's quite often because of how we have set them up to fail almost. So we have to switch that around and think, how can we set them up for success to exhibit the kind of behaviors we want to see more of?
I mean, having your own feelings is completely fine. You know, you can feel like your birds are your children as much as you want. You can love them, and in some ways, they may show an affection towards you back, depending on the species and what their experiences are. However, that's where you draw the line. Then you start to look at it from their perspective and how you can look after them the best you can to show your love for them by looking after them in the way that you should do. Yeah. What I want to talk about kind of bridges the subjects between the next section's training is we talk about social media and seeing certain things on social media like stubbornness, aggression, and it being like said as a norm and really positive. Obviously it's not. It's not a good situation, especially when birds are biting online and people are like saying, oh wow, isn't it cute, or they should always bite, that's what they do. It's not true, by the way. You can train biting out and you can reduce it. But the bridging topic was, you may have seen some of my shorts and the clips I produce showing my parrots interacting with miniature human items. Now, there's a very clear reason I do this, and there's twofold. One is I want to show just how clever these little guys can be. I'm not giving them these little toys because I want them to take little sips out of mini bottles of wine or eat mini pizzas or anything like that. I'm doing it because I want to show how clever they are, but also it's enriching for them because they're playing with items. They don't see these things as what we see them as. They're not little mini chairs to them. They're just items they train with and interact with in their environment. So in that, it's a novel enrichment technique. It is not me trying to replicate things for them, which I see quite a lot some ways, like people feeding like mini pizza. I've seen a mini pizza made out of like a little bit of cheese. No cheese for your parrots, but it's educational, and that sort of education I think is positive. And you know, I have my anthropomorphism towards it because I think it's cute, but that's where I draw the line. Like an example, they're doing training, they're having novel enrichment, they're getting rewarded for that. I'm not trying to like put my feelings onto them.
Yeah, and I think with training as well, you know, obviously it's an essential for any parrot owner to do some training each day because there's lots of different things we can do, like targeting, as Jason said, or just kind of teaching them to exist in a human environment. But there are lots of different ways where we can anthropomorphize training. For example, we want to give our bird like a whole almond for doing one behavior, and it's like, well, that's going to be the end of your training session then, you know, because we want to give them a big treat. And whilst jackpot reinforcement can be good when, you know, you're really trying to pinpoint an awesome response to your cue, you need to be mindful about how much you're feeding, you know, in terms of portion sizes with treats, which you talked about before with portion sizes, and, you know, what's an appropriate portion size for your bird. You know, they don't have to have a great big treat every time they do something amazing. It's like, you know, with human children, it's like, you turned up, yay, here's a ticket, you know, it's, you know, the trophy for taking part type thing. You know, you want to give them appropriate sized and appropriate type of a reinforcer to make sure that they're being set up for success and actually getting the most out of their training session.
And I think a lot of this comes down to expectations, and this is probably the main reason why some birds are surrendered, you know, to be rehomed. And I think a lot of it has to do with they enter in thinking these birds are toddlers, thinking that they're so smart. And what we don't realize is they're not emotionally intelligent like we are typically. And so we have these human expectations for them as if they're going to be, quote unquote, part of the family. Now, they can be, but not as a human equivalent. They have different needs. And no one is saying that you need to throw them in a cage and treat them like a bird or an animal. Like, they need to be treated like a bird, but there's nothing wrong with that. That's the most appropriate thing you can do. And so when people tend to get birds, it seems like many are expecting a bird that's going to talk back to them with meaning, that they're going to be, you know, little feathered kids that they can, you know, mother, and things like that. But those going into it with that type of expectation is only going to do a disservice to the animal.
Yeah, for sure. And the whole talking thing is perfect. You know, whenever you say you've got a parrot, it's like, does it talk? Can it say its name? And it's like, you shouldn't be getting a parrot just in the hopes it can talk, because, you know, not every species can have that ability and things like that, and every bird's going to be different. And also having this expectation that they know what they're saying as well. Like, more often than not, they don't. There's some anecdotal evidence to suggest that some birds can use language in an appropriate way. I was kind of looking at this recently in a couple of studies and things like that, and if any of you are familiar with Alex the African Grey with Arian Pepperberg's work, you'll know just how smart he was, but also that was an incredibly stressful experience for him to understand and really work on understanding these processes of understanding the concept of numbers and language and things like that. So some birds can be incredibly smart in that way, but I think it's, as you say, unfair on all of the birds under our care to expect them to have that complex consciousness, because it's not necessarily accurate.
Yeah, and having met Irene Pepperberg and talked with her many times, you know, those types of experiments that Alex and his I guess we can call them colleagues, that's anthropomorphizing, but the other birds in the program, I mean, they were working with people daily for hours. And so can you train your bird to respond to questions about objects and use that? Yes, and they're using a technique that's actually used with autistic children to help them better communicate. And so, like, those things are possible, but it requires a substantial commitment on your part as the human in the situation to make that happen.
That leads on perfectly to what I wanted to say. When you see social media, and maybe some of my posts are fueling this as well. All these posts of parrots doing amazing things, and people, like you said, expect quick results, and it does not happen quickly. If you want to have a parrot and you want them to do advanced techniques, like even just putting an object in a receptacle, it requires training, and it requires effort and work and motivation as well, which we say a lot. You want your parrot to do something for you, even from a simple step up, you need to have the adequate motivation if it doesn't know what to do. So expecting quick results and for it to just fly off and they're going to be chatting and everything, it's just not going to happen. Similarly with some female species, people get a female cockatiel, and I frequently have it, they're like, why isn't it talking? Why isn't it talking? It has no evolutionary need to talk. Only the males sing and talk. The females, they're the ones that need to be impressed. They don't care. They're just going to squawk and they're going to have fun. Yeah. However, you can still train them to do tricks and enrich their lives through that, and also enrich your own if you're prepared to put in the effort. So expecting quick results and seeing what you see on social media and expecting it to happen immediately is just not going to happen. It's just not going to be the way. And other thing as well is respecting their body language during training is very important. And this is something you can do through observation if you don't know very much about it. Let's just take an example of a conure. And we have a conure, and it's just a generic conure, not ours specifically. You have a conure, which I actually have another point as well. There are a couple coming out now. You have a conure, and it's on the back of the chair, and you want it to step up. And you put your hand up, and you're saying step up, and it's just looking at you, or it's leaning away because you only just got it. That's a pretty clear sign from that conure that doesn't want to go on your hand, especially if you haven't got any reinforcement. However, you may be thinking, oh, but I'll push it a bit further, I'll keep trying because I want those quick results. You've got to understand it from their perspective. That hand may be scary, you may be scary, you need to become something reinforcing and positive for them. And again, this is about baby Olive specifically. So baby Olive, talking about training a parrot to react in a certain way, we've trained inadvertently because it was just trying to get her used to us and behave with us.
She's a turquoise green cheek
conure, sorry. Baby Olive now kisses continuously. If you make a statement, say a statement to baby Olive, she will nod her head and kiss, and it looks like she's agreeing with you. Now, we use this behavior because she had some very difficult circumstances. She was a big biter, quite a harsh past, but we use this to get her used to being with us and to interacting with us and for something positive. And so what, say if I put that on social media and I was like, are you cute, baby Olive? And she would be like, people who watch that immediately think, well, she's agreeing that she's cute. No, she's just agreeing with me because I'm probably going to give her a treat, or she's been that self-reinforcing to her and it's fun and she enjoys it. It's something that's really positive for her. So it's important to know that while the action may duplicate what we do, the intent is completely different. Yeah.
Cool.
Sorry, all right, I thought I was going to jump in again. So let's move on to the next section.
And you had mentioned, the male versus female thing, and that is a huge. I mean, as a biologist, sexual selection is kind of the norm when it comes to female choice. And females almost, and there are a few exceptions, but females in the wild, like, they're wired to produce the egg and put all that investment into parenting. And so they're going to choose someone that they're going to be picky. If you don't believe me, look at the Marion Petrie studies out of the UK around peacocks. Fascinating information. But, females don't have to perform like males do in order to get a mate. And that does spill over. And you definitely do not want to anthropomorphize courtship. You don't want to do that with your birds. Trust me on that.
It's very true. This leads on to our next subsection, which is anthropomorphism in day-to-day life. This is kind of a bit of open to you guys, what you guys want to talk about in it. My sort of topics for this were cage timeout, which I'll launch into immediately because we've sort of touched on it already. And cage timeout is a big issue because I'm one of those believers that obviously you had the bedroom, the cage, and they should be able to go in there and enjoy it, but they should be out as much as possible as well. They should be having an enriching environment, with the exceptions if you have aviaries or bird rooms, because they are effectively out all the time anyway. But you want to provide a nice balance for your parrot. And it's all about quality time, not quantity of time. And you see on some forums people actually having contests with each other. My bird's out 24/7, well, my bird's out like through the moon, 18 hours, 20 hours. Is it quality time though? Are they just out, just flying around your house? Are they getting any enrichment in their house? Is there any toys provided outside their cage? Do they have any sort of activities with you or training with you? And then sometimes in these situations, you find the birds just don't know how to do anything. They just fly around the cage. They have to be caught rather than voluntarily step up. They're not getting the enrichment. And that is where seeing this whole divide, they must be out of the cage, not from our perspective, but from theirs, is so important because it leads to so many troubles.
Mm-hmm. For sure. For me, I think sometimes it's about our lifestyle and how we anthropomorphize. For example, you have your work day and that's okay. And some people, don't like the fact that people are out all day at work and then they come home and they've got birds. That's fine as long as, as David said, you're putting in that quality time when they are out and about.
And the cages look good as well.
And the cage is big enough and suitable enough, and they've got the species appropriate enrichment as well. But also, your bird needs to have 12 hours of light and 12 hours of dark. And, just because your bird wants to stay up with you, it wants to have a little snuggle, you have to get that balance right with your lifestyle and their lifestyle, because if they have less than 12 hours of darkness, there's a good chance it's going to trick their body into thinking it's breeding season, and then you're going to see all these undesirable things, and then you're going to think that your bird is being mean to you or it's attacking you for no reason at all, when actually a lot of it comes down to setting them up to fail because you're not giving them the right amount of kind of dark light photo period, and maybe you're petting them appropriately. So it's about the day-to-day interactions and analyzing how did that interaction go with my bird. And a lot of times we say with clients as well, when you're doing like training sessions, or perhaps your bird has this undesirable behavior, see if you can film your interactions and you can look at it from like an outside perspective instead of being in that emotional moment, and say, okay, well, my bird's feathers were up and its eyes were pinning and I didn't notice that because I was just babying my bird. And it's about looking at it from an outside perspective to see maybe why you're kind of setting your bird up to fail and how you can kind of switch that around.
Yeah, and I think not keeping a bird in a cage at least part of the day is to me that's I perceive that as dangerous, because I can't watch them 24/7. And you can parrot proof your house all you want, but there's still walls to chew through, right? I mean, it's just the way it is.
They'll find
and
danger.
So they'll find ways, like velociraptors looking for weaknesses in the fence. But I think they need to have that safe space. And when I've monitored birds in cage who were caged for a part of the day, and we looked at their stress hormone levels, they weren't stressed. Actually, they weren't at all, because I think they had that safe space where they felt comfortable. And I think making sure that they have that and they're comfortable in there and they have things to do, and you're changing it up, they're accustomed to change. Like that's I see people giving in thinking, oh, every time I change something, the bird freaks out, so I'm never going to change anything. That's why birds suffer, because they're not accustomed to change, and we need to keep them accustomed to change. They should not get the exact combination of foods every day. They should not, have the same toys. I mean, if you've got 5 really great big toys for your macaw, let's just say, and every day you can rotate a new one in there just to keep them, just to keep change going, that is great for your bird. That is not mentally damaging. Mentally damaging is allowing them to have neophobia, a fear of the new. That's damaging. And so, I think that out of cage time, but also in cage time is important. Both are important. And parrots are resilient. They're not, I've seen people anthropomorphize and say how mentally damaged they are because of how we care for them and things like that. Parrots have been kept for centuries by people on all continents pretty much. And so, they're obviously more resilient than some birds are, non-parrot birds are, as far as, keeping them the way that we do. And so we need to feel less bad about that and more positive, because we can give them fantastic lives where they're thriving, unlike the wild where they often are just surviving.
Mm. It's an important point you touched on there with regards to changing up things, keeping things constantly rotating and not promoting neophobia, because like us, parrots do like routine a little bit, and having some routine is useful. However, like with us, having some flexibility within that routine and adjusting it is very helpful. It's about finding the balance between the things and not just almost giving in a certain way to the way we interpret how they think. The other thing I wanted to touch on here is punishment. Now, punishment doesn't really work with parrots at all. As the biting example that Jason gave right at the start, in another subsection, whereas if you say, for example, your parrot bites you and you're like waving your finger at its face and going, no, that's not a punishment for your parrot. That's just you reacting for your parrot, and that's reinforcing to it. Similarly, if you get bitten and then you take your parrot back to the cage and then shut the cage, that's not teaching your parrot it's naughty or anything. It's not like we're a human toddler. It's teaching your parrot that if it wants to go back to its cage, all it has to do is bite you, and you're going to pop it straight back in there, and it's going to get exactly what it wants there. And it doesn't really work that way. So it's very important to not interpret the way you deal with behaviors. We'll call it undesirable behaviors we don't like to see, and try to fix them in human ways, because it doesn't really work too well.
No, I mean, generally speaking, for most undesirable behaviours, the best course of action is to not react, wait 5 seconds, and then give them a chance to earn positive reinforcement. But because, again, we're attributing how we've been brought up, our society thinks that people should be brought up, is this idea that punishment is the only way that you can correct behaviour, and it's not. And quite often it actually perpetuates more undesirable behaviour, because there's such a miscommunication between what you're looking for and what your bird's experiencing. So it doesn't work. So definitely positive reinforcement is the way to go.
The other last sort of thing to bridge on to our last sort of subtopic and final thoughts is, a lot of the time we anthropomorphize our birds with the best of intentions. It's good intentions that leads to it. We're trying to understand them through our framework, and through the only framework we really have most of the time, because we look at things from our perspective. It's the same with human interpersonal relationships. I have a different background to Sophie or Jason, so I will see things from my perspective. But it's when I try to see people's perspective elsewhere, we start to see cooperation and things going well. That leads on to this: does anthropomorphism have positive uses with this good intentions? And rather than me launching him, because I've done that twice now, we'll start with you, Jason. What do you think? Are there any positive uses for anthropomorphizing our parrots?
I think that if you focus on the basics, like basic welfare, I think all animals, including us, should have access to good food and water. I think keeping it basic, when you think about animals in general, all animals that we keep should have good quality nutrition, access to clean water, and enrichment. And I think that if you're looking at the basics, anthropomorphism can work, because you're thinking about, like, what would I need to survive in a day, and how can I extrapolate that? And with nutrition research, I mean, we all know there's really not a lot of nutrition research around, unbiased research, when it comes to avian nutrition. And so we have to extrapolate human nutrition and what we know about foods, and how they can benefit our birds after seeing, the results. So I think there's places for it, but definitely not in behavior. I think that behavior is and like daily nutrition, I think that's where we fall down and have to avoid anthropomorphism at all costs, because we just see every day the negative benefits of putting how humans view food on birds, or how humans view their daily needs differently.
Mm-hmm. For sure. For me, with anthropomorphism, I can't even say it. because we're all guilty of it to an extent. For me,
Yes.
it makes me want to strive to do more to set my birds up for success, and not in the way that I want to baby them and, you know, shower them in colourful pellets and stuff. Absolutely not. But what can I do to help them be the best cockatiel or conure that they are? You know, what can I do to give them what they biologically need under perhaps less natural scenarios? Because obviously it's not natural for a bird to live in a human house, in a human environment, but we can still give them an amazing life. But we have to change how we do things, how we perceive things, and just give them what they actually need rather than what we think.
It's very true. Just trying. I mean, I think it all starts with the basic needs and having the good intentions to start with. So you don't have the good intentions, you don't have that desire to strive and do well for your parrots, then it's not going to do so well. And then maybe stopping at that point, you know, you stop at that point, you don't take it any further. You go to the point where I want to strive, I want to do better for them and look after them as best I possibly can. And just being compassionate to them in a way that doesn't, I don't know how to phrase it really, being compassionate and understanding them, but through their perspective, not through ours.
Yeah, I think another thing that kind of came to me as well is, like, say for example, as what we want to do is have a 12 hours of light, 12 hours of dark photo period. So they've got 12 hours of being technically awake and having opportunities for enrichment and stuff. How can we fill those 12 hours for them in a way that's going to benefit them? Because in the wild, most parrot species will be foraging for 50 to 70% of the day. How can we interpret that into our day, and what kind of ways can we feed them in the right way? What enrichment devices can we give in that 12 hours so they're not just kind of sat there? Yes, they can sit there for a bit, yes, they can preen, they can interact with us or their flock mates and things, but how can we fill that time period with things that are going to be mentally and physically enriching for them?
I think the biggest problem with anthropomorphism is only when it goes too far, and we forget that we're dealing with an entirely different species with its own values and emotional reactions, and that's where it becomes a big issue. When you forget that it's just not a little human, not a toddler, they're very intelligent, but they're not humans, they're not toddlers, and just keeping your mindset and keeping that in the back of your mind when you're interacting with parrots is remarkably helpful. So Jason and Sophie, do you have any sort of thoughts before we start wrapping up? Because we've been talking for quite a while now. There's lots to say on this topic. Is there any sort of things you'd like to sort of stress before we wrap things up?
It's always this way, isn't it? We love a long conversation. I just think, we want to do the best for our birds, but we need to manage expectations, and we want to do the best for the birds, not for us and what we think we want. So that's my takeaway.
And I think learning more about how birds behave in the wild, what they do, how they live their lives, how they've evolved, is really important so that we can respect them as birds and meet them where they're at, because we can't expect them to meet us where we're at. So I think, learning more about the birds we keep is an ongoing thing that should last the life of the bird.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, it's fun to learn about them, and it can be enriching for us to educate ourselves about them and understand them. So Jason and Sophie, thank you very much for joining me on this channel. I hope you guys all found it useful. We'll probably do more interviews across channels, and hopefully they'll be fun for you to watch and you enjoy. But in the meantime, from me, Jason and Sophie, take care and see you all later.